All right, this meeting is being recorded. I believe, I probably should have asked this before I started the recording. We left off talking about our accelerating pump, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I forget you're muted. Oops, move this over a little bit. Talked so long that my stuff turned off. All right, and so we talked about the accelerating system, and the thing about the accelerating system that we want to know is that that is there because of when we do a rapid throttle opening, the carburetor goes suddenly very lean with that extra air. So this particular carburetor actually sprays in some extra fuel. And I was just thinking, thanks to Songman, he sent me some pictures that he actually took. So I can bring some of these over. And we're looking at here is the Marvel shovelers out of our class. And some of the things to note are, well, these are the floats, obviously. Here's the actual plunger that goes in. That's the accelerator pump right over here. So should have got a picture of that, Solomon. All right, there we go. There's the plunger right there. And you can see here's the leather cup. And what I didn't explain yesterday, because I knew I'd probably get lost with you guys there, but it's got a little spring right here. And that spring is there, so when you rapidly jam the throttle, this is pushing fuel out of a very small little orifice. And if it wasn't for the spring, you could only move the throttle as fast as you could spray fuel out of the little tiny orifice. So this lets the plunger actually go down quite a bit and then forces the little cup down as it goes. So that's what that's for. But you'll get a chance to look at this and play with it when we get into our lab class someday in the future. What was I looking for? Right there. See that little hole right there? This is the accelerator nozzle right there. Here's the accelerator well over here, and down here's the inlet. So it's going to go down through that little hole and up inside of here. And then when you discharge it, it goes out another hole, comes back around, it goes up that little tiny hole. Main discharge nozzle right there. And there's another look at it right there. So wanted to show you that. What else do I got here? Oh, carb monkey. All right, move this over. All right, so where I want to go now is we're going to talk about another system, and this is the Economizer. All right, so an Economizer system, there's so much to say about that. Well, I want to say Economizer system, first of all, it is poorly named. Sometimes it's named appropriately and sometimes it is not. So let me tell you about what an Economizer system is. And then we'll tell this. It is also called, that's AKA stands for also known as power enrichment. So if we take what we know that to stay out of the red zone, that we want a rich mixture at wide open throttles or high power settings, and that is to prevent detonation. So if we take a look at a carburetor, this will be my chart, and let me see, we'll have rich, which way should we go rich? We'll go rich up here, rich, we'll go lean down here, and we'll have idle over here, and we'll have wide open throttle over here. So this is your high power setting. So somewhere in this area right here is going to be our cruise, which is to say that when we operate an aircraft, yes, we're going to take off at wide open throttle. We're going to climb to a safe altitude, and then we're going to back off our throttle, and we operate in around the 65 to 75% rates. So that's 65 to 75% power. We don't cruise around all day at 100% power, cruise around at 60 to 75% power, all right? But not to confuse you too much, this is the power setting. Sometimes in order to get 60 to 75% power, like I showed you in the Cessna 150 manual, sometimes you have to have the throttle wide open. It's just the way it is. Why? Because you've gone up in altitude, the air is thinner, and so the aircraft engine is making less power because of the altitude, Sue, because of the formula Planck. We've lost pressure in the cylinder. So to compensate, we increase RPM, but we still have 75% power. All right, so if we took a look at a carburetor and we thought, well, how should we make the carburetor to run? Just normally, without messing with the mixture, without messing with that. When you're an engineer and think, okay, we have to put in the main idle, the main nozzle, the main power jet, and we have to put in the idle jet. And those, remember, those are the little orifices that actually control how much fuel is going up to the discharge nozzle. Would I want it really lean, really rich, or kind of right in the middle for right around best power?
Right around the middle.
Yeah, okay, we'll say best power somewhere in the middle. Yeah, so if you think about it, you'd want it to be, it would look just like that across the board, right? All right, and you think, well, that's in a perfect world. I would really like that. But then we got to think about it a little bit, and what are some things we know? Well, at idle, is it running best power, or is it running rich of best power? We talked about that yesterday.
Rich.
Yes,
It's got to be rich. We talked about that when we adjust that idle mixture screw. We want it 50 RPM rich of best power. So, right, so we know at idle, it's actually supposed to be up here. It's supposed to be rich. All right. So we want it rich. Then we go back a couple of days and we talked about the red zone. We don't want to be, the red zone's a bad thing. And in order to keep us out of this red zone where detonation is, do we run it at best power, or do we run it a little lean, or do we run it a little rich?
Rich.
Okay, we run it rich again. So we run it rich again. So now we know that we have a problem. The engineer sat down and said, well, we should always have it at best power. But then somebody, in the committee says, well, wait a minute, I'm on the idle committee and I need a little bit rich over at idle. All right, thank you, Mr. Idle committee person. And then the guy over at the high power setting says, wait a minute, got a problem over here in the high power committee. We also need it to run rich all the time. And so the engineer says, all right, fine, we'll make it rich all the time. And then of course the committee over here for the cruise people says, whoa, wait a minute. Now you're just wasting gas. We don't need it to be rich over here in cruise. We need you to fix it for us. So, okay, so erase that. And so what the committee comes up with is they said, rather than this line being like that, we need it to look like this. And that's what the carburetor should automatically be engineered to do. So at idle, it's going to be rich. Let me back that off just a little bit. So it's actually probably a little more abrupt than that. So it goes probably right like that. So right off of idle, as soon as we get to the transition, okay, so we need it to look like this. But then as soon as we get past our 65 to 75%, we need to see an increase going on. Now I'm just making up this chart. Don't take this and publish it, because as you can see, I'm just making up as I go. But what I want you to see, this is what it should look like. All right, sort of. So in the middle, we need it to be best power or lean. And over here at the idle, we might be rich. And over here at idle throttle, we have to be rich. All right, so to do that, they're going to use something called either an economizer or a power enrichment. Now, if I had my way, this is my way. So we'll just put this over here, Kevin's way. If Kevin was king, a economizer would lean out the carb. And a power enrichment, ENRICHMENT, means that it makes carb richer. But they didn't ask me. They did not ask me what I wanted. And so the point I want to make here is so that when the carburetor, well, like 10 things at once. Okay. So in my way, an economizer would take a carburetor that is normally running like this and drag this down. All right, that to me would be economizer, meaning in the cruise range, it economizes it. And then I would say, well, a power enrichment looks like this and enriches it at power. So it's normally lean and it makes it go rich. And I guess I could add that a little bit right there. So hopefully you can see the difference. So a power enrichment, green, is already lean, but it makes it go rich where it's supposed to. And a economizer starts out rich and makes it go lean and then lets it alone and goes rich on its own. See, so it would normally want to be here. And the power enrichment normally wants to be here. You guys follow that, I hope? All right. The problem is they didn't do this. The names don't mean anything to them. Some things are called an economizer when in fact all it does is add fuel. Does that sound like something that's an economizer if it just adds fuel? Not to me. Some things are called a power enrichment when all they do is take away fuel in the middle. That's not power enrichment to me. That's called an economizer. So I'm okay if we're discussing, especially in lab, and you say to me, I know that the manufacturer of this particular carburetor calls this a power enrichment, but Kevin, I'm looking at it and this looks like more of an economizer per what you say. I'm going to go, oh, all right, you've got it. All right. So just know that economizer and power enrichment are used in the same way in the industry, but yet an economizer may add fuel, an economizer may take away fuel. Power enrichment may add fuel, power enrichment may take away fuel, but they're all doing the same thing. They're all trying to create that curve that I drew, which is really, it really has more to do with the upper end. You want it down here at cruise and up here at wide open throttle. And they're designed to make it do this all on its own, right? And there's many different ways that it's going to do that. So we'll look at the ways that it's going to do that, and hopefully that helps you out. So point number two, regardless of the name, meaning power enrichment or what was the other word, or economizer, regardless of name, it enriches the mixture above cruise settings. And cruise settings are, we'll say, I wrote in my notes 60 to 70% power. I'm going to make that 60 to 75% power. All right. And what is the whole point behind this? Well, one, by doing that, it keeps the mixture at cruise settings from being too rich. And what happens if it's too rich? Well, foul out spark plugs and we waste fuel. And at the same time, when we use too much fuel, then we have soot in there and carbon buildup and all kinds of, it's just not a good thing. So we don't want to use too much fuel. Plus pilots are really cheap. Trust me on that one. So one.
I'll second that.
Is that Harry?
Yep.
You got to save for the Mercedes.
Yeah, well, actually, there was a joke when I used to work in the boss's daughter. She was pretty cool, but she was working in there, and she was very, now you bring a female into the equation who actually has some fashion sense. She pointed out to me one day that she goes, I can always tell a pilot anywhere I'm at. She goes, because they all wear the same shoes. And at the time, Costco was selling these sneakers called Court Classics. And every pilot that walked into our shop was always wearing the Costco Court Classics. So yes, because we're cheap. All right. So one, keeps the mixture cruise settings from being too rich. And number two, adds extra fuel at high power settings, And why do we do that? detonation. We want to stay out of the red zone. So by adding this, this extra fuel, we stay out of the red zone. All right. 1, 2, 3 things. I wrote 4, but I'm going to say 5 types. We'll see what happens. 5 types. So I'm going to dish you to 5 different types of these economizer / power enrichment systems. And as we go through them, we can discuss and say, okay, would we call this a power enrichment or would we call this a economizer? So the first type is the needle type. Needle type. I'm going to be honest with you. Some of these I've never even seen before. Some of them I'm very familiar with. So, and I'll write a note and then we'll take a look at a picture. I'm not going to write this in my drawing because it would get crazy to do all that.
What's the most common in the industry?
Depends on the carburetor size. So, and the manufacturer. So I'll tell you as we go through, hey, this is a really common one and I've never seen this. So as the throttle, I know Steven, he just wanted to know what's the common one so he could ignore the other ones. Scores are going to go down, buddy. As the throttle is opened, meaning more power, a second jet is opened. And you guys remember what a jet is? A jet is not a jet engine, but a jet is a second orifice. It's also called an orifice. So main discharge jet or the idle jet is another way of saying that. So the second jet is opened, allowing more fuel, allowing more fuel to the discharge nozzle, to the discharge nozzle. And what that would look like, I'll do it a couple ways here. I figured out I can actually use my drawing program twice. All right, so in this carburetor drawing that I had to redo, right down here, I've got my little orifice right here that's restricting fuel. So only so much fuel can get through here. But what I could do is I could parallel this. I could parallel that. I can make a second route with another jet in there that would allow fuel to bypass, come around here, but only open it up under certain conditions. Now, of course, I'd have a hard time drawing all of the mechanism that would go through there. So let me see if I can find my PowerPoint here and get to where I want to go. There we go. All right, economizer systems. This would be exactly what we're talking about. So if we look at this, my laser pointer, we have the normal main metering jet. So this is normally fuel is coming through here, through this way and up. And as I open the throttle to wide open throttle, it's going to lift this little needle up and then fuel is going to come down through here and it has a second way to go, which in effect makes the main metering jet twice as big. So would you call this an economizer or would you call this a power enrichment?
Power enrichment.
Power enrichment.
All right, so if you said power enrichment and that made sense to you, you're doing good. So that is in fact what I would call a power enrichment. But what is it called here? An economizer. See, it doesn't really economize at all. Unless you think about it backwards and say, well, as I go towards mid-range, then it closes the needle, so that economizes it. So I guess it just depends on your perspective of where you're looking at it.
Puts more money in someone else's pocket.
There you go. Okay. Okay, what is my next type? My next type is the piston type. So we have the needle type, we'll say piston type. All right, so the needle type, I've seen that. That is not terribly uncommon. Piston type. So similar, in operation. Similar in operation. in operation to needle, but uses it to needle, but uses a double piston. Uses a double piston. So I'll tell you what, I will show you the picture and then tell you about it, and we'll come back and write some stuff. All right, so there's my double piston type. So in cruise, let me see which one's in cruise here. Laser pointer. In cruise, let me see. A is cruise, okay. So piston, that looks like that. So in cruise, here we go. In cruise, the top piston allows air to enter hole in the venturi. So we've got a little hole here. That's our economizer. Okay, so it's coming down through here. I'm gonna look this well. Here's my main metering jet. So fuel comes down through, has one path only, comes up, there we go, out, and we have one jet. So over here, now what happens is we go to full throttle, this comes down, allows fuel to enter right here, comes up in here. It also mixes with a little air here, which is our emulsifier chamber or air bleed. So it adds a second air bleed. And then comes almost, well, it's actually got a second discharge nozzle, so to speak, right here. So we have primary always going through here. Remember, the main air bleed always adds air so that we have emulsification and makes the finer droplets. So you're always going to look for your air bleed. And then the second passage comes up through here, around through here, second air bleed, mixes, boom, there we go. So this right here is going to be a cruise. This right here is going to be at high power settings. And again, why do we add the fuel? Stay out of the red zone, keep it from detonating. Also, as the theory goes, it's adding fuel for cooling, but not my theory.
Hey, Kevin,
Yes.
if you have like a seal failure on those pistons, then you're gonna have fuel all over the carburetor, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing about carburation. Once you start getting into seal failures, then that's the problems you have. In fact, I was telling you guys a story about flattening the shop air. And we never really did. Nobody asked me, hey, what was the problem with that carburetor? When the person rebuilt it, it was, I believe, an MA45, which has a double chamber. They're a little bit complicated. They have an inner and an outer chamber, so it takes a bunch of O-rings. The mechanic who built it failed to put an O-ring in one of the shaft seals. Now, to his credit, there was a mistake in the parts book and it did not show one going there. But it took quite an astute person to troubleshoot it, figure it out, see what was going on, note how it was put together and say, there should be a seal right here. Otherwise they're going to do this. So, all right. So, okay. In cruise, let me see. Top piston allows air to enter hole in venturi, air to enter hole in venturi. And bottom piston blocks fuel passage. And let's see, above cruise, so high power settings, above cruise, and I guess I have what, one more minute here. Above cruise, top piston blocks air. Blocks air, and bottom piston opens fuel passage. Bottom opens fuel passage, and then that means that extra fuel is ported to engine. So even though this picture doesn't show it real well, can you guys see the arrow floating around?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I don't always have to go. If it's letting air through here and here, adding extra air is going to make it go leaner at this point. So the extra air makes it lean. Satisfying this air bleed right here, because the venturi has a need. It's a suction, and it has, you've got to fill that need of suction. If it's coming from here, it means there's less suction acting on the discharge nozzle, which is automatically going to lean this side out. So we could actually do it in stages if we wanted. So stage 1, we add air, which is just air without fuel. Stage 2, we could block this off and say, okay, now it's fuel and a little bit of air right here coming out. And then stage 3, we come over here and say, okay, now we're going to dump fuel here and fuel here. I don't know why I just did that. So stop it. So 3 stages. All right. So that is, let me go back to my notes, because I know some of you want to get caught up. It is break time. And it's break time. I know. So let me stop this and let me see. Stop recording.